why do you think someone needs to be a tribal leader, and do they need to be one?
Well, the reality is a lot of times people may not see themselves as a tribal business leader. And we can break that down into, tribal and leader, like what the different, what those components mean. But a lot of times you may not realize that you actually are, that you've got a lot of those components in place. And the reality is if you don't actually own it and step up and you do it strategically, you kind of fade into that whole vanilla marketing thing where you're always struggling to stand out because you're not really visible and recognizable and people don't get you.
Welcome back to the Teach Traffic podcast with myself, Ilana Wexler. This is a show where we reveal the best tips, tricks and tactics to increasing your website traffic and then converting that traffic into leads and sales. We also discuss what's working right now in the ever-changing world of web marketing so you can apply it to your business. Welcome back to another episode of Teach Traffic. I'm your host, Ilana Wexler, and in today's episode, I'm talking to a really interesting person. Her name is Janel Beckers, and if you've been in the online space, especially in Australia, you have most likely heard of Janel. She's had a few different businesses, and now she has a business called Romance Your Tribe, where she helps business owners create a tribe of loyal fans online. And I've invited Janel to talk with me today about the difference between being an influencer and being a tribal leader, and importantly, how that affects your marketing. And what we cover today are some really interesting points that you can apply to your business regardless of what you're selling, if you're selling a product or a service, or regardless if you're a small business or whatever really industry you are in. Janel brings up some really interesting points and distinctions in how you can do your marketing online, obviously, and how you can really create a tribe of people around you who love your brand and love your products, etc. So really excited about this episode. For information and show notes on today's episode, you can head on over to teachtraffic.com, which is our brand new website, which should be launched by the time this episode goes live. And obviously, if you're not new to this podcast but haven't been listening for a little while, you will notice that it is now called Teach Traffic. It used to be called Talking Web Marketing, and we've renamed it to be Teach Traffic in line with our brand new website called teachtraffic.com. Now, I won't wait any longer. Let's get stuck in today's episode. So welcome to today's episode of Teach Traffic. I am interviewing a wonderful guest called Janel Beckers. Janel, thank you so much for coming and agreeing to come on today's episode.
Oh, I'm excited to be here, and hello everybody who's listening.
Hello, everyone out there in the world. So I've invited Janel today because I wanted to talk to you about something which I know you talk about a lot, and you are. I'm interested in your thoughts on the whole concept of being an influencer in your market versus being what you call to be a tribal leader, and I guess the nuances and the distinctions between the both of those roles, and ultimately what that means for your marketing. And I think really this applies to any kind of business owner, actually, whether you are putting your stake in the ground and how you do it and how it affects your marketing. So I thought no better person than to talk about this than you, Janel. So thank you so much for coming on. Before we kind of get stuck into what we're going to talk about today, do you mind giving people a bit of a quick 5-minute intro about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure. So interestingly, I have had a huge pivot in my business in the last 18 months. And we may cover a little bit on that in the call about why that happened because it is relevant to what we're going to be talking about. But my business is called Romance Your Tribe. So that's my business name. Previous to that, I, for 10 years, had a company or a business, which was Wonderful Web Women, which started out as a search for role models with me being like the passionate reporter. And over the years of, working with so many successful women around the world, interviewing them, creating content from what they'd done, building in my own tribe around that, it only took a little while, and then my clients, started saying, look, enough with the whole passionate reporter thing. Like, we see you as the expert here. We want you to teach us the way that you do things. And so I started evolving, the way that I have done things and my processes, the way that I get results for people. And now, sort of like 10, 11, 12 years later, I have a very, very definite system that I use to help people, who help people, so like service providers, coaches, consultants, helping them to really step up and be seen as a tribal business leader, the kind of people, the people that people see as like really being a leader that they can follow and they want to do business with them. So I've really, over those years, perfected that, and now I just absolutely adore seeing the results that I'm getting with people in such a wide range of industries, and just really seeing them step up and attract people to them rather than this constant chasing.
Okay, so before we get into your system and how you really, I guess, educate people in becoming that tribal leader, before we do that, why do you think someone needs to be a tribal leader, and do they need to be one?
Well, the reality is, a lot of times people may not see themselves as a tribal business leader, and we can break that down into, tribal and leader, like what the different, what those components mean. But a lot of times you may not realize that you actually are, that you've got a lot of those components in place. And the reality is, if you don't actually own it and step up and you do it strategically, you kind of fade into that whole vanilla marketing thing where you're always struggling to stand out because you're not really visible and recognizable and people don't get you. So yes, if you're intending to be able to really create a brand as a service provider, rather than, selling widgets, you're just making it hard work for yourself if you don't.
And so are you referring to like even a personal brand?
Yes. So probably the best way to do that is if I describe what a tribal business leader is.
Sure.
Well, sure. And we could probably then talk about how that's different to an influencer, because this is where people get mixed up a lot. Okay. They will see, creating a tribe, they'll see as stepping up as a leader being very much the same as being like a social media influencer. And I see them as really quite different, and I see people getting it mixed up and really doing unnecessary marketing that is doing stuff that is really uncomfortable for them, that they don't need to be doing. So, and that's probably a good way for me to be able to really describe what a tribal business leader is, so people can see how that actually fits in with what you're doing. Does that make sense if we approach it in that way?
Yeah, that sounds good. Let's do that.
Okay, cool. Well, the thing with it, if you think about influencers, because quite often when I talk about, do you need to be a tribal business leader? And that's a good question, is because a lot of times people are seeing that as that very, very visible personal brand, that really sort of out there all the time. And if you think about influencers, like, you will be following people who are, especially on Instagram, you'll see it a lot, but also on Facebook, where you'll have the people that have got tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands or more followers, and they're very, very much, putting really inspirational quotes. They're putting very aspirational photos. They're sharing a lot about their lives, and that's something that a lot of times people will see is, well, that's what I've got to do to build a tribe. But in fact, it's quite different to be a tribal business leader. Now, there can be influencers who are tribal business leaders and vice versa, but this is the main difference. Like, when it comes to business models, the influencer, very often their business model is to be getting sponsored gigs and to be a speaker. So they're looking for keynotes, they're looking for, the people will want to give them money because they have a big following and they inspire and influence. So that's quite often their business model, and a lot of influencers will just stay as their main business model. Some will eventually evolve over into a business leader, and that business model is more, you've got a process, you've got a way of getting results for your clients. You've got a way to take them from point A to point B, and you know that if you get the right people, that you can help them get results. And I'm sure a lot of people who are listening here today will go, well, yeah, I get results for my clients. So your big focus is not necessarily just on inspiring, it's on getting those results. So that's a big difference in the business model. Now, when it comes to the way that you market then, and, this could be for people who are listening here that are, that with your specialty being paid traffic, it's again, you could be using the same for your paid traffic, but this is also going to help you with your more organic reach. Is the kind of, so an influencer is looking at really doing a lot of their posts and things very often is about them. Yep. Because they are the product, really. They are, it's going to be sometimes very, very transparent, or, sort of like constructed transparency. It's very much about them. Whereas a tribal business leader is, your marketing is going to be more about your clients and the results that they can get and shining the light on them. Not, of course, everything is on them, but it's more about how you work with your clients. It doesn't mean that you can't also be sharing more personal stories, but it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be to that extent, which is nice. It takes that whole pressure off you to feel as if you have to be, looking perfect all the time and all these, the perfect life, which is total bullshit. I mean, really, everybody who seems to have that they can't. Surely not.
Especially if they've got young children.
Oh, of course. I know. I mean, really, that's those backdrops. We know that you don't live like that. So, that's, as the tribal business leader, it takes that pressure off with your branding to have that perfection and also to be so incredibly, what can almost feel invasive, because it's not so much about you. And the other part that comes with the marketing is, with an influencer, they're very often marketing a lot, like they're in your face at least daily with their social media content, and a lot of what they're doing is inspirational and aspirational. As a tribal business leader, you don't have to be in their face as much, because your business model is different. You only need to have the perfect clients who can be following you. You don't need to be having tens and hundreds of thousands of them following you if you've got the right ones. So your message is a lot more around not just how to, but why. Why would you do? What sort of mindset things do your customers have to get over to feel that they can actually get the results? And it also around really, like you're doing here through your podcasting, you're putting out content there that's helpful for people, that is not just a dose of motivation. It's, really practical stuff. And so if you stick with that as a tribal business leader, and we'll talk more about, what does it take to have that tribe and be the leader, those simple distinctions can mean the things that you could be feeling that you need to be doing with your social media marketing for, to get that traffic. There's a lot of stuff you don't need to do anymore because honestly, it's not necessarily going to make you the money.
Yes, that's interesting. And I think it's a very subtle distinction, but a very important distinction of where you're turning the camera lens, really. Are you turning the camera lens onto yourself, or are you turning the camera around and facing it outwards towards who it is that you serve, which is ultimately that's just infinitely better, and it's what people are thinking is, well, how can this help me, rather than being so interested in the particular person. It's interesting because we live in such a world where influencers are getting the accolades and are almost treated as mini celebrities. And there's a lot of, I guess, pressure on people to that's what you have to do in order to be that will get that level of success. But based on what you're saying, and I agree with you, is actually you don't,
Oh, absolutely. Because you've got to come back to, you're running a business, okay? And if your business model is getting keynote gigs and sponsorship deals, well, then follow the influencer model. But if your business model is going to be serving clients where you're going to be working with people to take them from point A to point B, to get them results, to get them outcomes, well, you don't need to be doing that. It's a different model. So really the whole, there's no use having this whole sense of, I've got this great following who are all inspired and follow, want to know what I'm having for breakfast, it's not going to put the money in the bank. Yeah. Because it's not necessarily going to be the people who are needing your services and are going to be paying for it. So, yeah, you can stand back and go, I don't need to do that.
Wasn't there some famous case study recently? I'm probably going to butcher this a little bit, but the crux of it is this, that there was a influencer, and I'm doing air quotes now, although this is just audio, an influencer who had millions and millions of followers, and he or she couldn't even sell 36 t-shirts or something with all those followers. So, yeah, it's not like you can go to the grocery store and pay for your groceries and redeem your followers that way. It certainly doesn't mean money in your business bank account by any means. Okay, so now that we understand the distinction, and I think it's an important one, do you want to maybe touch on what you said we were going to touch on, which is what does it take to be a business or a tribal leader?
Yeah, sure. So the concept of a tribal business leader is something it's been evolving for me for a few years, and that's obviously with a business called Romance Your Tribe. Obviously, tribe is an important part of that. So as part of me kind of really, I guess, reverse engineering the way that I've created success is I started, thinking about the idea of tribes and started doing a little bit of research on there and really getting to understand how they work. And a really great person for people to follow, with Seth Godin, because, he's done a lot of work on tribes, and I really liked his definition of tribes. So if we start with that, then I can show you really how does that leader fit in. And so I love this definition that he's got. A tribe is a group of people connected to one another, connected to a leader, and connected to an idea. And they only need two things to be a tribe. So this is the important part: a shared interest and a way to communicate. Now, the thing here is, if you, a lot of people will not see themselves as a leader, but if you can clearly articulate who it is that you serve, what your idea is, what do you believe, what do you stand for, and what do we believe around here, and a way to help people, then you will create a tribe, and they will naturally see you as the leader because you can articulate that very, very well for them. So if we go, I can go over those three things which are really important to actually create, to create that tribe that will position you as a leader. So there's sort of three main things that you need, and it'll be really interesting as people are listening to think, have I got that? Because you may be very close to being able to easily step up as a tribal business leader, which means that people are going to be attracted to you. You don't have to be working so hard to win them over. You might have these three things in place and not even recognize it, so own it, baby. Or you might just, there's quite often one or two things that people aren't doing properly, and there's one in particular that I know a lot of people struggle with. So if I go over those three...
Sure. The suspense is killing me.
Is it? It's funny. Okay, so we think about this way. So the very first one is when you think about, like it talked about, they have a shared interest. Now, when it comes to business, as a tribal business leader, that shared interest is the transformational journey that you take your clients on, or that your clients go on. So if you're in a business where you're actually helping people to get from point A to point B, that journey that they go on is their transformational journey. Now, you may have, and we'll talk a little bit later about how you can help them to be able to see how you can take them. But that's the first one to know. Like, do you know the steps? Like, if you've got a client that's trying to go from point A to point B, do you know the different steps where they get frustration points all the way along? Do you know what their outcome is that they're aiming for? Can you clearly articulate that? So that's your first thing that you really, really need to do. And I find a lot of people, especially when their business is fairly new, they haven't done that work. Like, they haven't actually talked to enough people who are their potential clients to really get a good understanding of what is the journey, the different steps, and the transformation that takes place. So that's number one. That becomes, the thing that we have in common, that shared interest, is that transformational journey. And you've also got what is it about your own journey in business or in life that makes you uniquely qualified to be able to guide them, to help them to do that. So be clear on that as well, because if part of being a tribe is a shared interest, they not only want to know, okay, I can help you get this outcome. They want to know why you. Like, is it because you've been on a similar journey, or is it been because you've helped clients just like them to get there? So what's unique? So that's number one, and a lot of people have rushed through that. They have a superficial understanding of all of those steps, but really they can't communicate it very well to people.
Yep. I guess this is where the real insights and depth of knowledge comes from, simply just talking to your existing customers.
Oh, look, honestly, I always find, even people who their business has been going for a while, but they're kind of struggling to get the sales, is when we start talking about, there's lots of different ways that we can get insights. So, there's when I started out in my first business, Wonderful Web Women, so we didn't have Facebook, so I couldn't go like stalking different Facebook groups and finding out what my target market was actually talking about. I went a lot. I was at internet marketing events, and I wanted to know about what frustrations women had building their businesses online. I went along in the toilets. That's where they were all hanging out at lunchtime. Wow. At these internet marketing events. I went along the queue.
That's so
all these women lining up. Well, how else was I going to know? Like, my first business that I did, it was hard work because I never did that research. I thought I did, but I really didn't. I wasn't going to make that mistake again. So after about 4 different events in a row where I turned up but kind of weird going up and down the line of women who were lining up, chatting to each other, and I went up with an MP3 recorder asking them, if I can find the most successful women online, what do you want me to ask them? What's your frustrations? And by the time I had finished doing that, like, I knew my market inside out.
Wow.
I knew their frustrations. I knew the language that they used.
Yeah.
And so now when I say to people, look, you've got to find these people, but you don't have to go and hang out in the loos anymore. Like, you know, you can do it all through Facebook groups, and you can contact different people. Say, hey, do you mind if I just ask you a few questions? So I'm doing market research. I just want to understand. Can we hop on Skype and I'll talk to you?
Yeah.
But a lot of people won't do that. They just don't want to do that. It's a fear of rejection. They just think that people are going to say, no, I don't want to talk to you. And if they do, you move on to the next one. I don't think every single woman who I kind of really weirdly went up to with an MP3 recorder in the line up to the toilet said yes. But yeah, so that's number one is, do you know? Like, how well do you know them? And importantly, focusing on the transformational journey that you take them on.
Number two.
Now, number two is, you have an idea and a common language. Have you ever noticed, like, when you get parts of different tribes, so groups, communities online, the really successful ones, people start using like in-house language.
Definitely. Yep.
And, you can do that in a way that is really, strategic without it being manipulative. And there's some big ways that you can do that. But if we start off with first the idea, so we've talked about an idea and a common language. The idea, this is where I find a lot of people go wrong. They just don't step up. And this makes the difference between you if people aren't seeing you as the leader that they get attracted to. I bet that this is one of the things you're not doing. And I want you to think of it in this way. Like, people who, and this is actually a girlfriend of mine, just sort of said this quote years ago, and I just fell apart laughing. And then I thought, you know what, that's true, which is people who sit on the fence, they get splinters in their ass.
Yep.
And so you want to get off the fence, get the splinters out of your butt, because if people want to know that they belong in your tribe, they also need to know if they don't belong in that tribe. So for you, you're a great example. You're very, very clear with people that, if you're going to be using paid traffic, you don't want to complicate things. You really simplify them. And, if you're really, really smart, you'll be using a combo of Facebook ads and Google ads. Like, you'll do the really clever things that you do, but that are actually quite simplified. So you're very, very clear on that sort of stuff. Whereas some other people will be really quite different. They'll be talking about how, much more complicating it, or you absolutely must be doing Google ads. And if you're not over there mastering that, everybody should be doing it. I mean, I'm probably not saying very well here what your point of difference is, but,
that's okay.
Just an example.
I think for me, yes, I'm an advocate of definitely using both platforms, but not equally. Like, there are some businesses that they have great success on Facebook, and that's amazing, but it doesn't mean that they should completely ignore Google. They can have like a tiny presence on Google. Maybe they just do retargeting on Google. So they've got a leg in one camp and a toe in another camp, rather than both legs equally. And also, I think the misconception is that you need a massive budget. You don't need a massive budget to have success with online ads. But anyway, we're digressing a little bit.
Well, we're not really, actually, because that is an important thing. It's getting off the tribe where you can be saying, you know what, all these people that keep on saying you've got to have a huge budget, and if you're not willing to spend the money, you're not really a player. With you saying something like that and you saying, you know what, I'm calling BS on that, that's you getting off the fence. And so a lot of people won't say those things because they're worried about criticism. They're worried about offending people. But if you don't, then people will not really know like what you stand for. So they don't know if they want to be part of your tribe.
Yeah, I mean, I only know that because I've done I've looked after so many accounts with a small budget. And we did lots of small things, worked on tiny audiences that worked really well,
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's hard because I think in the market, and especially in my market, there's all these amazing screenshots of spending huge amounts of money, and it's almost like it is an entirely different skill set actually of managing that amount of money profitably. But the reality is that lots of business owners don't have a kind of business actually that supports that level of marketing. They don't have a whole sales staff team to manage all the inbound leads, and they don't have a CRM system, and they don't. What comes with managing $100,000 a month on ads, let's say, is a completely different type of business than managing $1,000 a month on ads.
Yeah. And you know what? That's the kind of thing that then people can go. Like if you're really vocal about that, and if you're getting off the fence and using that a lot, then that means all those people who are out there going, I am so intimidated by this whole huge budget thing, and there's no way I can ever do this, so I'm not even going to start. They can go, oh, this is somebody who this is where I belong, somebody who gets me that, I can be really successful with a small budget on this, and it's different. So you can just this example of, what makes you different and what attracts people to you. Like it doesn't have to be the kind of thing where, you're being ridiculously controversial, but it does mean going, you know what, this is something I believe strongly in. Yep. If you can go, like, I could just hear your voice when you talked about, well, yeah, I've worked on these. Like, it was that incredible sort of like, well, I know this to be true. Like, it's just duh. For a lot of people, they didn't even, recognize it. So those are the things that for people who are listening, when you're thinking, well, what do I get off the fence about? That's kind of the sign when you can hear yourself going like, well, yeah, this is obvious. You've got to really amplify that. Yeah. Amplify that message, because that's how people know that you're the leader, that they can trust you, that this is what you stand for. That's a really important part about your idea. So yeah, get the splinters out of your butt, and now.
Cool. Okay, so that's number 2 of a common language, and I totally agree with you on that. What's the third element?
So this other one here falls in with, it's the last one, which is the common language, but it also fits in with what your business model is. And this is what makes it so that you have a tribal business leader that is, it takes it to that next level, which makes it so that you can really simplify your business profitably with this message. Now, this is where it comes down to, creating a trademarkable language, a trademarkable framework that you take people on. So it might be called a signature system. It might be called your actual, just your steps that you work people through. But if you think in terms of, okay, if I take people on a transformational journey, and so for example, it doesn't really matter what industry you're in. It's very rare that somebody will come in and they have an absolutely completely different way of getting results for people. Everybody will say they do. But when you think about it, if there's people who are listening here who may be, say, business coaches, regardless of who you're working with, you're probably going to take them on similar paths. You're going to be able to find out, what position they're at now, like what's their problems. You're going to find out, what their market is, what their message, what are they selling. You're going to be taking people through similar steps. Of course, you have your unique way of doing that. And the way that you differentiate yourself from everybody else is, sure, you identify those steps, and sometimes it can be very difficult to stand out. You've got, comparing apples to apples. For you to become something far more exotic, like a pomegranate or whatever, is you create your own language around that. Now, an example is I've gone to the extremes, and so I have a romance your tribe. I break those steps down into, the different parts that like that go. I can talk for ages about, flirting, inviting you back to my place, getting commitment, romance, all of those sorts of things, and how that ties in. You may be having parts of what you do that you can somehow tie in. It doesn't have to be a theme, such as mine has been around romance. Yours doesn't have to be a theme. It can simply be called the Welcher method. If we just picked your name out of the hat.
Anyway.
So, but actually creating your own language, your own way of, this is what we call them here. So, for example, you've heard me using a few here today. You've heard me talking about a transformational framework. We've talked about a transformational journey. We've talked about tribal business. Those are just different languages that you start using. Now, by using that, it makes it so people can't compare you so easily. And you've actually got something that allows you to start developing your own language that people will start to use when they've been following you. So it sounds, sometimes, you'll be going, well, I don't necessarily have a system. If you get results for people, you do. Okay, so start thinking about what parts of that can I be creating my own language around that are unique steps that I take people on, so that they're going, all right, well, I need those steps and nobody else has talked about it in that way. Therefore, you're showing leadership. You've got something nobody else has had, and you can trademark it. Yes. So that also, it brings you up to that next level where you're protecting your intellectual property there, your own brand. It becomes far more than you having to rely on your personality, your charisma, your referrals. It actually positions you as somebody with a solution that is unique.
Yeah, I like it. How long do you reckon it takes for that to distill and filter out into the market?
Oh, well, I mean, as long as it takes you to create, to be clear on what your idea is, and make sure that your marketing uses that language and explains that right from the very beginning. And actually, this is another thing where I find that people miss an opportunity with this. So, and I can give you an example through my own business, so people can go and have a look. And that's, if you've got, your end result is your service or your program that you've got, and the way that you sell that and the way that you're structuring the delivery of it will be with your unique languaging. So, it might be, there's the Alana 5-step method, and, we'll give them some kind of name. So if that's the end result, what you want to be able to do is right from the very beginning with your opt-ins is you want to start using that language. You want people to know that, this is the kind of language we use right at the beginning. And so it may very well be a simple introduction to what are the 5 steps that people need to get their results. And it's using that language.
It's educating your potential customers of your language.
Absolutely, absolutely. And just doing it right from the beginning. So as an example, here we go, segue over to how you can get to see what I do.
Yeah.
So I'm just, as we're recording this, putting the finishing touches. And so, whenever you listen, hopefully it will all be there. So if you go to romanceyourtribe.com, you'll find it anywhere on the website, but it's also, if you go /success maps, what I've done there is I've got for 5, I can segment. This is another thing, is really getting clear on segmenting your mailing list, so that people who come onto your mailing list, you can be speaking to the stage on the transformational journey that they are at, because different people will need to hear different messages depending on how far along that journey they are. So on there, I've got success maps for you to be able to position yourself as a tribal business leader. Each one customized for each of the 5 for the 5 stages that you're at. Now, when people, so they're already getting that language at the beginning. Now, when people get this these rocking reports, these step-by-step maps, each one is introducing them to the distinct language that I use for each step that they need to master in order to be there. So it's right from the very beginning. So you can see an example there. But the important thing is it's introducing people to the steps that I help them to do when they work with me. It's helping them to know, well, this is what you've got to have in place. If you can work it out yourself, well, go on. You've got that's going to be enough for some people to do it. And for other people, it'll make them realise, oh, yeah, this is where I belong. I get this. I understand it. I get the language. So in answer to your question, how long does it take? Well, it takes as long as for you to put together that opt-in, really, that first lead generator, and start promoting it.
Well, I guess part of my question is also, so yes, you've got it as your opt-in, but then I guess how long does it take for your market and your message to really filter through into people so they start using that language? So like I'm on your site right now as we're talking, and I can see your different segments that you're talking about. So stargazer, starblazer, superstar, and a shooting star. So that's your language and they're your segments, obviously. And I almost can imagine fast forwarding if you were to hold an event and people are talking to each other and they say, so what are you? And oh, I'm a stargazer, and oh, well, I'm a shooting star, or whatever, right?
Yeah.
But that takes time. And that takes time for people to get that message enough so they self-identify and in turn take on that language. And I guess from your experience, how long does that process take? Is it pretty quick?
Oh, it is. Yeah, it's really quick.
Interesting.
Surprisingly quick, especially if you have a way where it's got to be about them.
Absolutely,
so,
yeah.
Yeah, it's really got to be about them, because if it's going to be something that's, that you can identify as unique about them, and I can tell you, just between you, me, and all our mates here, those I've actually now, there's a fifth one that's been added. So as soon as that, because my business is evolving, there's a fifth group that I can really help now as well. But when I first came up with these concepts of, segmenting my list into 4 different types, and I have a very, very good system. It's very, very unique on how do you segment into the 4 segments and what they are for your marketing. The profitable avatar quadrant method, which is another podcast on its own. But when I first had broken those up into those 4 groups, they didn't start off being called things like stargazer, starblazer. Stargazer, which is a person that really, they don't have a business yet, but they really want one, and they quite often might be in corporate. They doesn't mean that they're newbies in everything. They've probably really switched on people what they're doing, but they don't know anything about a business yet. Well, originally in-house that was called no business and no idea. So that's not really going to make people want to use that language. But a stargazer worked, so that took quite a few bottles of wine and a few girlfriends. But
I think it's great because it sort of implies the desire and the and the aspiration, but yet possibly not there yet.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And so the more that you can make it about them, that the language relates to them and it's something that they can really resonate with, well, then that itself also makes it so that people are happy to kind of share, how they identify themselves. But it also may be, like even just using the word tribe. I will have people who will message me all the time going, I haven't got my own tribe yet. I can't wait to get a tribe. So just even using that rather than saying list or following, that's from, that can take a week or so. It's just a matter of you putting it out there.
Yeah.
Really, it doesn't have to take forever. You can make yourself stand out far more than you may be doing now, simply by, first of all, working through that process to make sure that it doesn't sound like, I'm just coming up with a name, that it makes sense, with what your whole brand and your tribe and the people who you help, that it will resonate. But once you've got those steps, well, then it just becomes very, very quick.
And I mean, if I think about so many other businesses, you can see how they've applied it almost regardless of industry and what you're selling, products, services, different industries. I think there's a real power in doing this. I mean, not an easy process coming up with really good names that are as catchy as yours, but still, I'm sure, a very worthwhile process.
Oh, absolutely. And you know what? It doesn't necessarily have to be them identifying as the segment, because a lot of my clients, we always do the profitable avatar quadrant exercise, because it's really powerful. Their clients may, and their leads may never know what their segment type is. But it's definitely used in-house. But, your own language, may not have to be in that way. It may simply be, this is the way that we describe my process. It's got a 5-step process. Or even just choosing certain ways that are, they're kind of like disruptors, I suppose. So, for example, I talk about, get the splinters out of your butt, or depends who my audience is, a version of butt. So people will now come back and say that. I talk a lot about scare-sighted, that combination of like when you're really, really scared, but you're kind of excited. And so, you're going to, which happens so much to us as we're growing businesses. I had just started using that in all my emails and in my marketing, just because it was a word that I kind of invented and then found out somebody else, it wasn't that new. But
I've never heard it before.
Well, I just thought I was so clever coming up with this idea. I used it everywhere. But now people have started quoting me and tagging me whenever they use the word.
Yeah.
So, yes, Scare-Sighted, the book, will be out next year.
Cool.
But, yeah, so they're, just keeping in mind, what works best for you, but making sure you're using that language consistently. Own it. You own it, baby.
Yeah, nice.
And that starts to build your tribe as well.
Okay, so if I'm listening to this episode and I'm thinking, yes, this is exactly something that I need to do in my business, what would you say is the first place that I need to do to get started? What do I need to do?
That very, very first one is getting super duper clear on the transformational journey that your clients go on. Be super clear on what is point A for them and point B, and what does it feel like for them at point A and point B, and those steps all the way through. Do that first. Like, really take the time. Get on the phone, talk to past clients, say to them, I've really loved working with you. Like the ones that are fantastic, contact them and say, look, I just want to clone you. So can I just have a telephone call with you just to find out, what was step A and point B, and, how does each step feel, and what were your challenges? Like, take that time to have those conversations. And then I want you to really look at why you, like, what's it about your transformational journey that's made it that at this particular point in your life, in your business, what makes you uniquely qualified? What's your story? What's your transformational journey, or your business's transformational journey that coincides with theirs? So that there's looking for, what makes you qualified to help them on their transformational journey. If you start there, the other stuff will fall into place so much quicker.
Mm-hmm. If you were starting again, is that what you would do from starting out?
Well, what's really interesting? I mentioned, I think, right at the beginning that I've had huge changes in my business in the last 18 months. Wonderful Web Women, ran for 10 years, multi-award-winning, really, really strong brand, but I started to outgrow it. Yeah, I could feel that I could do more than I was doing with people, and I was no longer just working with women. And so it didn't feel congruent. I didn't feel as if when people went there, it was no longer women helping women. I had kind of become more about the process. So I thought, well, you know what? I've got to make some big decisions here. Like, do I, stick with this brand? Do I start a new brand? What is it that I offer people? So I decided, you know what? If I was my own client, what would be the steps that I would make myself go through? So I actually tested my process and streamlined it on my own business. So step number one for me was really getting clear on what is it that I wanted anyway. Like, what was it that was unique about me, and what was why, what sort of business did I want to create and what lifestyle. And then the next one was exactly that step, getting super duper clear on the transformational journey. So I actually tested my whole system, refined it, and then as I was doing it, I was creating templates and worksheets and instructions and, swipe files. As I was creating it in my own business, I was creating all of that for the program that I intended to create, which I then launched. So that it was tested on my own business. So when you say, what would I do? Well, I did it.
Yes, fair enough. There you go. I don't often get that answer.
Yeah, I did it, and it's still fresh.
That's awesome. Wow, that sounds really interesting. Is there something that we have not covered in this episode that you think is important to mention?
You know what? If we just circle more onto the scarce-sighted, because this is one of the things that I find is the biggest challenge. You can be very rationally going, okay, these are the steps that I need to do. Okay, Janet said do this, do that. Alana said do this, do that. You can work through all those steps. But at every single point when it comes to you going, well, you know what? This is what gets me off the fence. This is what I believe. This is my own, this is my trademarkable framework. This is the kind of language I use. This is me communicating that to people. Every time you do those steps, like, it brings up, some fear. It's just really, really normal. And I find that a lot of people don't follow through because they're scared. They're scared of failure. They're mainly scared of criticism.
Some people are scared of success.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of times that scare of success is, there's a lot of things around there, but, if I'm successful, then I'm going to be visible. Then people are going to realize I don't know what I'm talking about. So a lot of that fits in with there. So though that scared feeling is just to know that it's really, really normal. And interestingly, I've just been reading this week since I have, you heard it here first, folks. The Scarce-Sighted book will be out next year. So as part of that, I've been researching around the whole idea of fear and excitement. And what is really interesting is the exact same chemicals are going into your bloodstream. So all of the adrenaline and the cortisols get released when you're afraid. It's the same ones that get released when you're scared. And it's actually not too difficult to switch your brain from, instead of going, you know what, I'm really scared about this, is to be able to switch it just by going, I'm excited about this. This is going to happen. It's exactly the same chemical reaction happening. So you can switch it around yourself. So you can embrace scarce-sighted and step into it. And it's not a difficult reframe to do because your body is already interpreting them as the same thing anyway.
Yeah. Well, I think that's really interesting, and I can certainly relate firsthand. I've definitely done some things in my career that I was scarce-sighted. Getting up on stage being one of them. That used to be one of my biggest fears, like standing up on stage in front of, 200-300 people, and a mix of emotions, scared and excited, and of, the unknown of that. But it is, the fact that I can do that is a testament that anyone can push through uncomfortable barriers.
Yeah, and you know what? That's where the next thing that you do in your business becomes easier. Because I mean, I've seen you present on stage quite a few times, and you have my overwhelming, I guess, emotion when I've seen you present is, oh, she's just very beautifully methodical and calm, and I trust her.
Oh,
Whereas,
thanks.
yeah,
If
so
only you knew the fears inside of me
oh,
up there.
well, of course you would be. Anybody is like,
Yeah.
but it's not that, a lot of times people think, oh, I've got to be bouncing on stage and tell funny jokes. But yeah, just stepping into it and being yourself and trusting the process is, yeah,
Yeah.
really, really, we wouldn't have met.
It's true. It's true. Yeah, I have to say that pushing through that barrier and getting over that hurdle has been an amazing transformation process personally and in my business. And I'm really grateful that I did that with obviously the help of some mentors behind me, getting me to the point that I said I can do that. But anyway, this is not meant to be about me. But I just wanted to, kind
Yeah.
of speak about that from a personal experience. And I'm sure, and it's interesting, I speak also to lots of people because I help people create campaigns and sort of promote their businesses online, and many people have similar fears about doing ads, interestingly, where they're scared about, what's going to happen if suddenly I get all these orders, and can I fulfill them, or am I going to spend all this money, am I going to get nothing in return? And I think that whole scarce-sided thing is applicable in so many different ways, in so many different businesses. So I think many people can relate to that.
Oh, look, business development, personal development, same thing.
It's
Really?
true. I never would have thought that before I started my own business, I have to say. I mean, therein lies the naivety of it.
Yes. Yeah, that's when you start thinking, oh, this is hard but exciting. Yeah.
But 80% mental, which is another thing. But anyway, that's probably a topic for another discussion. Janet, I could probably talk to you
Absolutely.
for a long time, but I am mindful of the time and the time that you've given me today. And thank you so much for coming and agreeing to talk on our Teach Traffic podcast. Before we wrap up, where can people find out more information about you?
Yeah, sure. So if you go to romanceyourtribe.com, and hey, there is a very good segmented quiz there that you can do, and you can actually see what I've been talking about. So you can go to romanceyourtribe.com, and you can also come and just stalk me over on Facebook. I've got a free group where our little tribe hangs out. Instagram, just put Janet Beckers, Janet, Beckers, into anything and you'll find me. So just come and stalk me in your favourite place.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Janet. It's a pleasure, as always, talking to you, and I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, bye everybody.
Thanks so much for listening to the Teach Traffic podcast. For more information on each of these episodes and handy PDFs that you can download, head on over to teachtraffic.com.